Humans, your ancestors, weren't just strange. They may have been a few thousand years ahead. In 2025, new research has given evidence that many practices they lived by weren't superstition at all. Cold plunges, sound rituals, herbal medicine, fasting, meditation, fermented foods, grounding, and breathwork. 8 ancient habits now backed by serious data. This video unpacks how science explains what ancient life already demanded. Resilience, clarity, and unexpected hacks with no brand required. Expect surprising numbers, a little sarcasm, and at least one takeaway that makes you question what we call progress. Let's start where survival once meant stepping straight into ice. Cold exposure, the original power-up. Picture the scene, a small circle of ancestors at dawn, standing barefoot on frozen earth beside a rushing river. The water is black, the sky is pale, and stepping in means pain before relief. They do it anyway. Not for spectacle, not for a social media update, not because a coach prescribed it, because life demanded toughness. Children were raised in it, warriors tempered resolve in it, elders carried the practice until their bodies finally gave out. What looks to us like masochism was simply their training ground. Today, that same elemental ritual has been reframed as a wellness upgrade with a price tag. High-end gym sell memberships featuring precision-cooled tubs. Retreats advertise cryotherapy immersion at luxury resorts. Apps and influencers rebrand shivering as a guided personal cold journey. The difference is striking. What once cost only courage is now packaged with LED lighting and a playlist. An ancient survival habit has been turned into a product line. But underneath the gloss, researchers in 2025 continue to confirm the same core idea. Cold matters to human biology. Exposing the body to icy water leads to acute neurochemical changes that can boost alertness and stabilize mood far beyond the few minutes in the water itself. People often describe a deep, lingering lift afterward. Steadier energy, calmer focus, less emotional, and unlike caffeine, which spikes and crashes, these responses appear to last for hours. It's not a placebo. It's how the nervous system copes with shock by reorganizing itself. And the story does not stop at mood. When the body hits cold water, it reacts with an inflammatory surge. Research shows markers like cytokines spike immediately and even up to an hour later. Then comes the twist. After about 12 hours, stress markers often drop below baseline, suggesting the body has begun recalibrating. Over weeks, this cycle may translate into tangible health gains. A widely cited pragmatic trial in the Netherlands, Bitch et al., 2016, even reported a 29% reduction in self-reported sickness absence among people who adopted daily 30 to 90-second cold showers for just 1 month. That's not anecdote, it's population-level evidence. Still, scientists emphasize that these effects emerge gradually, not instantly. The nervous system learns through repetition. The freezing gasp, the buckling breath, the instinct to retreat. Forced exposure retrains those reflexes. Over time, fight-or-flight circuits stop firing at minor irritations. That translates into less overreaction to daily stress. Essentially, cold becomes rehearsal for resilience. By practicing calm in the face of extremes, the body grows more composed under pressure. Even small annoyances, traffic, deadlines become easier to navigate after repeatedly surviving morning ice water. Cognitive benefits follow as well. Modern studies suggest that during immersion, blood flow is rapidly redistributed, sending oxygen toward the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain used for planning and decision-making. Trials now indicate that short exposures practiced 3 times a week sharpen performance on focus and problem-solving tasks. That clear, awake sensation afterward has measurable correlates. For ancient communities, clarity was survival. For us, it's research data confirming the brain thrives on contrast between calm and shock. Energy systems appear involved too. Scientists propose that cold encourages mitochondria, the cellular power sources, to operate more efficiently, possibly even multiply. While we can't quantify this yet, research suggests that routine immersion may help cells produce energy with greater stamina. Participants in various trials often report fresher mornings, greater endurance, and improved sleep afterward, a pattern researchers believe stems from shifts in hormone rhythms like melatonin. The mechanisms are complex and still under study, but the direction is consistent. Stress training seems to unlock long-term adaptability. Across cultures, these effects were understood in different vocabularies. Scandinavian parents often place babies outside to nap in sub-zero air, wrapped safely in wool, believing it would foster resilience. Russian communal life embedded the sauna to snow shock as a rite of strength. Japanese ascetic monks carried out waterfall meditation under torrents of icy water, seeing it as a trial of spirit. Different names, different contexts. The principle remained: exposure to cold creates a body and mind that bend less easily. In the present day, that heritage has been restyled as performance. We broadcast ice baths on slow-motion reels, narrate breakthroughs, and sell exotic retreats that recreate the simple cutting wind our ancestors woke to every morning. The irony is clear. A practice used for grit and necessity has become a brand strategy, yet the body doesn't distinguish. Whether it's a riverbank at dawn or a filtered spa tub, the outcome is still shaking muscles, followed by neural recalibration. Now to the numbers. The most striking evidence isn't about mystical immunity boosts, but about practical resilience. The bench trial showed fewer days lost to illness in thousands of participants after only a month of cold showers. Closer systematic review highlights the time-dependent paradox. Inflammatory markers rise strongly at first and only later settle down to lower levels. Stress tolerances increase over hours and weeks, not minutes. This lends credibility to what athletes and monks claim without charts, that discipline through cold pays dividends slowly but convincingly. That does not make cold universally harmless. Medical guidelines caution that sudden immersion is risky for those with cardiovascular problems, hypertension, or respiratory vulnerabilities. Cold shock can trigger arrhythmias or dangerous spikes in heart rate. Anyone considering it as a daily practice should consult a physician. Our ancestors didn't need disclaimers, they simply risked survival. We, with central heating and modern hospitals, can afford the precaution. All told, cold immersion teaches that discomfort can strengthen every human system. While mitochondria research remains ongoing, while immune findings remain nuanced, the combination of sharper focus, steadier mood, and fewer sick days creates a compelling case. What began as adaptation has become optional resilience training. The oldest natural stimulant was not brewed, smoked, or bottled. It was temperature. The lesson is easy to miss in a wellness market crowded with branding. You don't need a soundscape or a Bluetooth-enabled tub to participate in a lineage older than written language. Step into cold water and you step into the same cycle of stress and adaptation your ancestors endured countless winters ago. Our nerves, our brains, our blood vessels, they still recognize the shock as training. That's why this isn't just about bathing. It's about tuning the nervous system by pairing predictable discomfort with consistent recovery. The rhythm of stress and calm rewires how we face the day. Cold was the first natural reset button, pressed without ceremony, which leaves us with an open thread. If temperature could shift body chemistry so powerfully, what other forces did ancient people harness in plain, everyday rituals? Forces we only later learned were therapeutic. Sound healing, the first human playlist. Across ancient cultures, sound wasn't treated as a background. It was survival strategy, ritual, and medicine. Imagine a circle of people chanting until the air seems heavy, or a drum beat carrying through the ground until your chest matches its rhythm. These weren't concerts. They were practical events designed to change how people felt, whether sharpening focus, calming nerves, or energizing the group. From Tibetan bowls to indigenous didgeridoos, vibrations weren't decoration. They were functioning tools. Voices layered in rhythm were humanity's first curated playlist, not built for markets but for tuning the nervous system. Western attitudes dismissed this for centuries. Singing at a certain pitch, knocking wood in rhythm. If it wasn't explained with formulas, it was written off as mysticism. Ritual chants, sonic ceremonies, even communal drumming were slided into the primitive category. Yet evidence sat in plain sight. Villages calming tension with song, healing rituals echoing through stone temples tuned for resonance, entire communities regulated mood together through shared vibration. Ironically, the same approaches now return with luxury branding. Sound baths in glass-walled studios. Premium apps with subscriptions for binaural beats. Glossy marketing insists it's novel sound therapy. The truth, it's a repackaging of extremely old techniques, stripped of myth and recast as polished wellness. Modern science, slow but steady, has started lending detailed evidence. By 2025, researchers documented that low-frequency tones can reduce self-reported anxiety, shift brain activity from stress-associated beta waves to calmer alpha or theta ranges, and improve indicators like heart rate variability. Some controlled trials show reductions in cortisol and gains in vagal tone after structured sound sessions.
In other words, the body isn't
passively listening. It recalibrates its stress response to vibration in real time. The ancients weren't staging concerts. They were organizing collective stress management. We'll show you one concrete scientific result that explains why something like a drum circle actually changes your heart. Stay tuned for the takeaway. BeyondShortTerm.com, findings suggest deeper patterns. Some studies in the past 3 years report that rhythmic sound can synchronize brainwave activity, a process called entrainment. When repeated consistently, this entrainment may support neuroplastic processes, helping neurons strengthen their connections, but here evidence remains promising, not conclusive. Trials vary in design and quality. A 2022 systematic review on Himalayan singing bowls, for instance, reported multiple studies showing reduced stress and improved mood, but the authors flagged substantial heterogeneity in methods and a high risk of bias in many randomized trials. The safe conclusion is that these effects are real for some, inconsistent for others, and stronger clinical trials are needed. Still, changes in EEG rhythms, improved sleep in certain patient groups, and measurable reductions in stress hormones make clear that vibrations are more than symbolic. Physiology provides a clear picture of why this form of intervention works. Vibrations don't only reach ears. They move through bone, fluid, and muscle tissue. That's why a drumbeat makes the ribs hum or a deep chant seems to resonate through the chest. Sensory receptors register those oscillations, then relay them to the nervous system. The cascade can include shifts in endorphins and serotonin, as well as parasympathetic activation. What looks like communal ecstasy is often an orchestra of hormones adjusting to rhythmic mechanical input. Research even shows measurable increases in heart rate synchrony among groups chanting together, suggesting a physiological basis for the ancient feeling of unity after shared sound. Some of the most telling insights come from developmental studies. Fetuses in the third trimester recognize and respond to steady vibrations, their heart rates visibly calming under rhythmic tones. Babies, long before understanding speech, respond to singing with more predictable breathing patterns and camera states. Song as lullaby has been instinctive for millennia. Modern biology now validates why it works. Ancient midwives humming through labor and mothers rocking infants with repetitive melodies weren't indulging superstition. They were aligning young nervous systems with reliable sonic rhythm. Cut to the modern market. Firelit gatherings turned into curated sessions with quartz bowls, white mats, and headphones. Streaming beats tuned to frequencies like 432 Hz. Branding cycles between optimal resonance therapy or frequency healing protocols. And though polished, physiology doesn't discriminate. Heart rate variability improves either way. Cortisol reductions appear in both sacred circles and high-end studios. The marketing suggests invention, but the body runs on timeless response loops. Laboratory data brings an especially clear visual. Place volunteers under fMRI while exposing them to rhythmic low-frequency tones, and the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, quiets. Simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex, center of control and problem-solving, locks onto the beat, syncing its rhythm with the input. With no words, sound directly recalibrates circuits related to fear and attention. Reduce the jargon and the conclusion is simple. Music regulates stress at a structural level. Skeptics might argue about placebo, but group experiments counter that. Choir singers measured before and after rehearsals show elevated levels of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. They also synchronize breathing and even heart rate when singing in unison. That feeling of group connection after shared song isn't metaphor. It's actual physiological alignment. This helps explain why traditional cultures preserve music as communal medicine. The heartbeat wasn't just metaphorical, it was literally shared through rhythm. Even recreational sound shows these effects. The chest rattling bass at a concert creates real tissue-level vibrations, activating the vagus nerve. That nerve ties directly to calm states, digestion, and homeostasis. Enormous gongs, horns, and resonant halls used in monasteries all exploit this connection. Though practitioners didn't speak in neurophysiological terms, they were reliably activating the same pathways modern clinics now target for stress and trauma therapies. Hospitals have taken notice. By 2025, targeted sound sessions are being trialed for surgical recovery and chronic pain management. Some centers use harmonic frequencies to stabilize patient mood post-surgery, while trauma programs apply guided sound interventions to ease hyperarousal. In both contexts, the goal is to regulate physiology without pharmaceuticals.
Evidence shows reductions in
Self-reported stress and in some studies improved sleep quality. Still, reviewers emphasize methodological gaps. Sample sizes are small, outcomes vary, and bias risks remain. What's certain is not that sound is a miracle, but that it is a measurable tool in the body's stress management kit. That brings us back to perspective. For ancient groups, sound wasn't a luxury. It was normal infrastructure for emotional regulation. Gatherings around chants or instruments didn't cost subscriptions. Yet their after effects in calmer breathing and synchronized hearts mirror the outcomes noted in today's clinical trials. Centuries later, wellness culture charges $80 for a single sound bath, while early villagers had the same nervous system tune-up free by chanting around fire. The science may be newer, but the biology is not. Which, in a way, makes the most logical bridge to our next theme. If voices, bowls, and vibrations were engineering shifts in stress chemistry long before Eads confirmed it, it raises a bigger question. What else did our ancestors grind, brew, or burn that modern researchers would later validate with metrics and charts? Herbal medicine potions with lab results. Picture a village healer crouched over a stone slab, grinding a handful of roots into powder. The forest was their pharmacy. Leaves, bark, fungi, and flowers placed into teas or paste with no packaging, warning labels, or shelf life. Patients trusted the strange bitterness because for them bitter often meant relief. Far from being sorcery, those remedies carried active molecules now recognizable in modern pharmacology. The language of biochemistry didn't exist, but the affect living through another harsh season spoke for itself. For centuries, that knowledge was easy to ridicule. Early modern physicians dismissed root teas and mushroom brews as superstition or ritual without evidence. Yet with the rise of chemical analysis, things shifted. Botanicals once filed under folk medicine began showing measurable effects. Willow bark tea contained salicin, later refined into aspirin. Cinchona bark, steeped to fight fevers, yielded quinine, still the backbone drug against malaria. Academic journals today, like the Journal of Herbal Medicine, regularly publish randomized controlled trials, RCTs, and systematic reviews that evaluate those very plants. What used to be called potions now sits squarely inside evidence-based discussions about stress, cognition, and immunity. By 2025, the evidence for adaptogens, plants studied for their stress buffering effects, was stronger than ever. Some RCTs have shown that ashwagandha supplementation can reduce cortisol levels and improve measures of sleep quality, perceived stress, and resilience. Not every trial reaches the same conclusion, but the weight of data suggests it works for at least some populations. That reality reframes how generations of families used this root in India, not as ritual fantasy, but as a stress support tool long before neurotransmitters were named. Lion's mane mushroom, once a quiet folk ingredient in East Asia, is another example. Its reputation as brain food has cultural roots, but recent laboratory research found extracts can increase levels of nerve growth factor, a protein critical for neuron maintenance and repair. That doesn't mean eating a bowl of soup grants instant neurological rewiring, but controlled studies do suggest measurable biological activity. For monks historically brewing this fungus into broth, cognitive clarity may have been more than subjective. It likely aligned with subtle changes now detectable in the lab. Ginseng's reputation has been global for centuries, and trials continue to back some of its claims. Modern RCTs suggest benefits for cognition, working memory, and endurance, though effects vary by species, dosage, and preparation. Volunteers in certain studies demonstrated faster reaction times and improved recall under ginseng compared to placebo. Again, the variability is large, but that doesn't erase the point. Something in the root traded along ancient silk roads actively tunes attention and energy. These examples illustrate a broader reality. Many drugs familiar today descend directly from plants that traditional healers tested first. Beyond aspirin and quinine, whole classes of pharmaceuticals trace back to natural compounds, digoxin for heart conditions, vincristine for leukemia. Each was once embedded in a ritual or recipe, dismissed as crude or anecdotal until extracted, standardized, and renamed. The striking pattern is not that tradition was wrong, but that it was early. Importantly, modern science adds rigor ancient cultures could not. Randomized trials include controls, blinding, biomarkers, and standard dosing. Peer-reviewed journals catalog which effects hold up under scrutiny and which were exaggeration. But even as evidence mounts, researchers warn about limitations. Trials are often small, methodologies differ, and plant extracts vary, depending on growing conditions and preparation. Regulatory oversight is uneven across countries, and many so-called herbal products on the market have inconsistent potency, adulteration issues, or misleading labeling. Unlike pharmaceuticals, there is no universal standardization. That means consumers must approach herbal supplements carefully, ideally in consultation with clinicians rather than self-prescribing based on advertising. The irony is plain in marketplaces. Ashwagandha appears wrapped in sachets branded as Calm Reset. Lion's mane comes dried and powdered into capsules labeled Neurofuel. Ginseng is blended into energy shots for students. The marketing leans into futurism, but the plants themselves are the same species that monks, healers, and families consumed centuries ago. The innovations are packaging, extracts, and hashtags, not the plants. Meanwhile, evidence continues to filter through laboratory pipelines. Cortisol reductions in ashwagandha trials. Neurotrophic responses triggered by lion's mane. Cognitive shifts registered in ginseng studies. These aren't universal solutions, they're measurable responses in some settings, and it matters. Evidence makes clear that parts of traditional herbal practice contain genuine pharmacology. Not magic and not guarantees, but real chemical interactions inside the body. At the same time, the global market has built an industry on this rediscovery. Analysts valued the worldwide herbal supplement market in the tens of billions of US dollars by the mid-2020s, with steady growth projected. That figure is economic, not medical proof, but it signals how deeply herbal remedies now sit inside the wellness economy. Market interest grows fastest where clinical evidence supports safety and efficacy, another reminder that culture follows the data. Yet beneath both hype and dismissal, it's useful to remember how knowledge was built. Ancient herbalists didn't run double-blind trials, but they did track outcomes across generations. They noted which teas lessened fevers or eased minds, passed down those observations, discarded failures, and retained what worked often enough to matter. That process, slow but pragmatic, mirrors science more closely than stereotypes suggest. When modern pharmacognosy departments extract molecules for lab testing, they often start from exactly those long-lived observations. So yes, it's fair to imagine the village healer grinding roots on stone as an amateur biochemist. Their pantry was soya and weather, not shelves. Their test subjects were family and neighbors, not lab rats. What we call herbal pharmacology was once intergenerational memory. Clinical trials now translate that inheritance into numbers and p-values, but the wisdom didn't arrive overnight. It started in places without microscopes. The broader lesson is caution balanced by recognition. Some herbs show measurable effects in controlled trials. Others show promise but inconsistent results. Standardization remains uneven, and supplementation is not risk-free. Herbal medicine is neither miracle nor myth. It is a set of tools partly validated by science, shaped by context, and always subject to safe practice. If you're curious about herbs for stress or focus, consult reliable sources and licensed clinicians before following influencer advice. That's as vital a step as any dose itself. Seeing an arc from superstition to clinical evidence is fascinating, but it should not lead to overconfidence. Ashwagandha, lion's mane, and ginseng each highlight stories where the myth was partly true, but also where mechanisms and dosing matter. Without clinical guidance, the space between helpful and harmful can blur. The wise approach is not dismissal, and not blind acceptance, but informed respect. And this respect sets up an interesting question. If plants once dismissed as useless turned out to influence human chemistry, what about practices that required no grinding or boiling at all? What if simply rearranging the timing of when we ate transformed health every bit as much as what we ate? Intermittent fasting, not just a missed breakfast. Long before internet debates turned breakfast into a health battleground, fasting was already a central human practice. It appeared across religions and cultures, but not because anyone was quantifying calories. Early Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, and countless others saw food abstinence as a path to mental clarity, discipline, and separation from distractions. Ramadan, Lent, Yom Kippur, meditation retreats all approached it as purification rather than body image management. Monks spending days without food weren't tracking macros. They were trying to sharpen perception and connect with something beyond appetite. In contrast, modern eating advice for much of the 20th century framed 3 meals plus snacks as healthy routine. Skipping food was portrayed as careless, even dangerous. When the pendulum swung back, fasting resurfaced with new branding. Time-feeding patterns like 16:8 or 5:2 became headline trends under the label of intermittent fasting. Influencers posted countdown timers as proof of effort. Where ascetics once described cleansing the spirit, lifestyle gurus promoted fasting as a hack for leaning down. The action didn't change, but the framing shifted. What remains overlooked in diet discourse is what actually happens inside the body during extended breaks from food. Research by 2025 has clarified several mechanisms. A core effect is improved insulin sensitivity. When the body rests between intakes, muscles and liver respond more efficiently to signals that move glucose out of the blood. This matters because impaired insulin sensitivity is a key risk marker for type 2 diabetes. In lab data, fasting periods often produce smoother blood sugar profiles and stronger hormone signaling. Tradition spoke of cleansing, biologists now observe metabolic regulation. Another pathway activated by food restriction is autophagy, the intracellular process that recycles damaged proteins and organelles. Rather than an automatic magic switch, autophagy is a stress response mechanism that appears to increase when energy intake pauses. Think of it like night shift maintenance crews working while daily operations stop. Religious writings once spoke of inner fires consuming impurities. Molecular studies show that after about 16 to 20 hours of fasting, genes related to autophagy pathways are more active. It's not a guaranteed fountain of youth, but evidence suggests fasting periods promote cellular housekeeping that contributes to resilience. Cognitive outcomes have been a particular focus. Multiple studies suggest short fasting windows can boost working memory, spatial tasks, and learning speed. One proposed mechanism is the production of ketone bodies, which provide a stable, efficient energy source for neurons during fasting. Participants often describe clearer thought, lower brain fog, and more consistent focus during fasts. What mystics associate with sharpened spirit looks, in modern data, like neuroenergetic stability supported by ketone metabolism. Some studies also show transient increases in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein tied to neuron growth and adaptability. Historically, fasting aligned with lunar cycles, daylight hours, or spiritual occasions. Patterns like sun-up to sundown abstinence resemble what nutritionists now call time-restricted eating. Current circadian biology research emphasizes that when we eat can matter as much as how much we eat. Food intake synchronized to daylight supports hormone balance, while irregular or late night feeding can strain circadian alignment. Ancient rituals followed cosmic rhythms. Scientists now map those rhythms onto metabolic processes. Medium-term outcomes highlighted in recent clinical studies include reduced inflammatory markers, improved lipid profiles, and in some cases, enhanced immune responses. However, results vary depending on body composition, sex, and baseline health. A 2020 network meta-analysis in the BMJ, reviewing randomized trials, found intermittent fasting generally led to weight loss and cardiometabolic improvements, but outcomes were not superior to continuous calorie restriction. The main takeaway, intermittent fasting can be effective, but its results often mirror those of steady calorie reduction. It's a practical framework, not a magic cure. Nuance matters here. A study from the University of British Columbia Okanagan, UBCO, noted that fasting effects differ by body type. In people with obesity, metabolic and immune responses diverge from those in lean participants. This means fasting isn't a universal tool. Protocols that benefit one group may not translate directly to others. Such caveats reinforce why intermittent fasting should be treated as an option within broader lifestyle interventions, not as a standalone solution for everyone. Safety considerations matter as well. Intermittent fasting is not suitable for everyone, particularly people who are pregnant, breastfeeding, managing diabetes with medication, or living with certain health conditions. Clinical guidance is crucial before beginning any extended fasting protocol. While evolutionary history embedded fasting into human adaptation, intentional modern practice requires context-specific safety checks. Cultural parallels underline how old ideas find new labels. Japanese monastics fasted as purification. Greek philosophers valued abstinence for sharpening the intellect. Indigenous groups framed hunger as doorway to altered perspective. Scientific explanation today ties those perceptions to hormone shifts and heightened alertness triggered by scarcity signals. The language changed, but the effects noted across centuries remain compatible with documented physiology. The modern market, however, compresses fasting into tools for body composition. Publishers and influencers create charts, diet names, and quick formulas. Marketing often sells protocols as breakthroughs, when the reality is far older and simpler. Abstaining from food for structured intervals. The packaging suggests invention, but humans have repeated this cycle for millennia. Scientists continue to note that animal studies show lifespan extension from fasting regimens, but human data remains limited and mixed. While fasting appears to improve multiple markers of health, long-term mortality benefits in humans are not yet firmly established. It is best described as promising, not proven. This honesty protects credibility and keeps the conversation grounded. What makes fasting striking is its simplicity. No powders, no supplements, just time, pauses, and intake. The body's baseline systems respond by stabilizing sugar regulation, recycling cells, and in many trials, reducing disease risk factors. Ancient populations may have attached spiritual meaning. Modern labs provide biomarkers. At the ground level, it is still the same pattern of temporary abstinence followed by restoration. Framing fasting as either superstition or cutting-edge invention both miss the overlap. It is one continuous thread recognized through different vocabularies, from monks and philosophers to dietitians and clinicians. The terminology varies, but the physiological process is the same: break intake, reset mechanisms. That reset is practical, widely practiced across time, and not limited to religious or fitness motives. Which brings us to a different kind of reset, not one based on metabolism or food timing, but one rooted in attention itself. Because while fasting demonstrates how the body recalibrates when left alone, some cultures discovered that sitting still could recalibrate the mind just as dramatically. Meditation, the brain's free upgrade. Picture a monk seated cross-legged in a silent hall, eyes steady on a wall, body motionless for what feels like hours. To an outsider, it looks like inactivity, maybe even disengagement from life. But beneath that stillness, something deliberate is happening. Guided attention, observation of thought patterns without immediate reaction, training the mind as if it were muscle. These practices weren't described in terms of prefrontal cortexes or neurotransmitters. They were framed as presence, clarity, or release from distraction. Yet in effect, they function as a system of mental conditioning, building resilience, stability, and self-control without tools, just through breath and focused stillness. The practice did not vanish. Instead, it has been rebranded for modern consumption. What once involved nothing more than ground beneath you now comes bundled as polished products. App stores overflow with meditation platforms, complete with background sound design, street counters, and subscription tiers. Instead of monks offering guidance directly, users now pay to hear neutral narrators remind them to notice each inhale and exhale. The irony is plain: stillness once cost nothing and could be practiced anywhere, while today many people will only meditate if their phone tracks the session for them. The timeless practice of watching the mind has been converted into a consumer service. Science sits between these extremes, bridging memory and marketing with hard data. By 2025, multiple studies using fMRI scans and EEGs confirmed that regular meditation produces structural and functional changes in the brain. Increased gray matter density has been repeatedly observed in areas linked with attention, learning, and emotional regulation. Reductions in amygdala reactivity appear in meditation trials, meaning the brain's alarm center calms faster during stress. Other research reports improved connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and emotional centers. Cortisol levels often decline among those who maintain consistent practice, accompanied by improvements in heart rate variability, a physiological marker of flexibility under stress. In other words, the brain and body measurably tune themselves through repetition of what appears on the surface to be doing nothing. For accuracy, it's important to add nuance. Study designs vary. Sample populations are often small, and many trials face issues of self-selection bias. Results are consistent enough to matter, but they are not identical across every group or protocol. This does not diminish meditation's value. It simply means that findings reflect averages rather than guarantees. Researchers themselves caution against treating meditation as a cure-all. Nonetheless, the convergence across hundreds of studies shows a clear trend. Steady practice changes both psychological experience and physical markers of stress regulation. Historical practices prove remarkably consistent despite cultural variations. In Indian Vedic traditions, repeated syllables or mantras became points of focus that narrowed attention. Japanese Zen emphasized pure sitting, rejecting attachment to thought streams. Tibetan lineages employed visualization combined with rhythmic breathing. Christian and Islamic traditions preserved prayer recitation and rhythmic remembrance as their own forms of contemplation. Language and symbols differed, but all structured attention in ways that induced calm and clarity. From the modern scientific perspective, what unifies them is training concentration, regulating emotion, and reducing mental noise. Instead of detailing each style at length, the shared outcome stands out. Whether through mantra, silence, breath, or rhythm, the brain adapts, attention stabilizes, reactivity decreases, and regulation improves. Neuroscience frames this as increased connectivity and synaptic efficiency. Ancient practitioners spoke of purification, enlightenment, or communion. Different vocabularies, same underlying shift in mental function. Think, for example, of the brain scans. Frontal regions strengthen with practice, which matches the reported gains in focus and decision control. The hippocampus resisted age-related thinning, suggesting memory support. Amygdala activity dropped during provocation tests, reflecting diminished stress reactions. These are visible data points, not metaphors. The very regions monks once claimed could be quieted have been shown to settle in modern imaging labs. Clinical institutions have already integrated these findings. Hospitals now recommend mindfulness programs for patients with anxiety disorders, and evidence shows reduced cortisol and improved subjective well-being in these groups. Post-surgical patients exposed to brief guided meditation often describe lower pain perception and require fewer medications afterward. Workplaces tested structured silent breaks and documented productivity gains. Schools have piloted mindfulness modules with modest improvements in attention for children. These applications echo what monks once offered as voluntary practice, skills to stabilize mind and body within environments of stress or demand. At the personal level, the effect is straightforward. Stress hormones ease, emotional impulses slow, focus sharpens. A monk centuries ago may have described detachment from worldly turbulence. A 2025 neuroscientist measures decreased activation in fear pathways and smoother regulation of autonomic balance. Both observations point toward the same capacity, responding more evenly to life's triggers. For viewers, a practical hook helps keep this grounded. Right after explaining these brain changes in the voiceover, include a short on-screen cue inviting the audience to try a curiosity exercise. Simply place attention on one breathing cycle and note how quickly the mind wanders. No instruction manuals or detailed steps needed. Just a moment to recognize how difficult focus can be and why structured meditation matters. This moment of participation connects evidence with lived experience, sustaining engagement while reinforcing the reality that anyone can test this immediately. The commercialization is worth mentioning too. Apps and paid guidance are effective for many users. They provide structure, motivation, and accessibility. But the practice itself requires none of it. Sitting quietly without a timer, repeating a phrase, or following the breath accomplishes the same neural adaptations. The nervous system is indifferent to whether silence was instructed by a revered teacher or a phone notification. What changes the brain is repetition, not branding. In that sense, meditation is the rare wellness tool that remains entirely free for those willing to claim it. Viewed across time, the practice appears less mystical and more practical. People in monasteries, deserts, and mountain caves built strategies to regulate mental states. Today, people with deadlines and screens do much the same, though framed through health metrics rather than enlightenment. Both groups interact with the same hardware, the human brain. Evidence shows this hardware is elastic. Old rituals and new studies prove attention can be shaped, stress, responses can quiet, and emotional reactivity can soften with consistent practice. This is why meditation fits the description of a brain upgrade. It strengthens executive circuits, tempers alarm reflexes, and builds resilience, all without external tools. The only input is time, awareness, and steady effort. Compared with changing diets, paying for supplements, or swallowing pills, it remains one of the most accessible interventions discovered in human history. The catch is that the benefits accumulate over weeks and months, so the practice demands patience. The ancients had ample patience. Modern attention spans often don't. So while today's wellness culture tries to wrap mindfulness in music, slogans, and branded cushions, the mechanism remains exactly what monks practice: stillness, breathing, observation. The science behind it is newer, but the behavior is timeless. Calm was never an invention, only an observation dressed in evolving language. Modern labs and ancient halls confirm the same conclusion. Watch the breath, and the brain shifts. From here, it's worth remembering that not every cultural adaptation of an ancient practice targeted only the brain. Other traditions aimed squarely at the gut, shaping resilience not by controlling thought, but by storing food in strange and effective ways. And what began as necessity would later become another surprising point of agreement between ancient households and modern research labs. Fermented foods, gut bacteria's ancient festival. Back when summers ended and food had to last through bitter cold, fermentation was survival, not flavor experimentation. Families salted cabbage, soured milk, or preserved fish to avoid winter shortages. Each jar of crock wasn't an artisan recipe. It was a lifeline. Sauerkraut existed because without vitamin C, winters meant real danger. Yogurt, kimchi, miso, kefir, beer, these weren't inventions of luxury kitchens. They were adaptations to scarcity. Without refrigeration, the only safe bet was to let microbes take over and transform perishables into food that stubbornly refused to spoil. There was no discourse about digestive balance, only the relief of knowing cabbages in brine and milk in clay pots could be eaten months later without poisoning anybody. Fast forward to present supermarkets, and necessity has been replaced by marketing. A jar of sauerkraut now wears a label promising artisan probiotics. Kombucha sells in branded bottles at cafe prices, and probiotic capsules promise billions of active cultures. Where fermentation once happened quietly in cellars, it now shines under glossy market lights. Modern language dresses up what was once just daily practice. And while packaging is slicker, the actual process, microorganisms breaking food down, has barely changed in thousands of years. The real shift lies in how science talks about it. By 2025, microbiome research consistently shows that diets including traditional fermented foods are associated with greater microbial diversity in the gut. This diversity connects to multiple aspects of health, from immune regulation to stress resilience. Researchers studying the gut, brain axis, an ongoing two-way communication network between digestive tract and nervous system, suggest that microbial populations can influence mood and cognition. Some trials indicate probiotics and fermented products may reduce markers of inflammation or modestly improve mood measures in certain participants. Results vary, and many studies are small. The link is no longer dismissed as folklore. What ancient farmers interpreted as strength or balance after eating fermented staples may reflect mechanisms science now investigates. Yogurt cultures often introduce lactobacillus strains thought to interact with immune cells. In animal models and some human studies, these microbes have been associated with calmer stress responses. Other work shows fermented vegetables can alter gut microbial ecosystems in ways correlated with improved digestion and more stable energy. These are potential explanations for why cultures across the world treated fermented foods as vitality-preserving, even if the language was spiritual rather than microbiological. The immune story attracts particular attention. Chronic, low-grade inflammation is implicated in many modern diseases, from diabetes to depression. Some observational and early interventional studies suggest that people who eat fermented foods regularly may show reductions in inflammatory markers compared to those who don't. Researchers hypothesize that microbial metabolites communicate with immune pathways, nudging the system toward balance. None of this means kimchi banishes disease, but it frames the family dinner table of centuries past as an experimental immunology lab operating without microscopes. Nutritionally, fermentation is more than storage. It transforms. Grains exposed to bacterial and yeast fermentation become easier to digest. Proteins break down into peptides, and certain organisms generate vitamins like B and K during the process. Foods become chemically different inside those clay jars. For villagers, that meant calories lasted longer, but modern nutritionists now describe the same change as fortification through microbes. The outcome is a richer nutritional profile, even when basic foods like cabbage or soy form the base. There is also a growing interest in how fermented foods may affect mood. A developing concept in psychiatry, psychobiotics, looks at how gut bacteria might influence mental health. Preliminary trials suggest that introducing specific probiotics or fermented foods can lead to modest reductions in self-reported anxiety or depressive symptoms. Evidence is still inconsistent, and mechanisms remain under study, but the gut-brain connection is real enough that psychiatrists increasingly note diet as part of wellness strategies. Imagine a medieval farmer unknowingly cultivating bacteria that produce metabolites affecting mood stability. For him, it was just sour cabbage. For modern science, it's one more tool in understanding mental resilience. Children's diets historically included fermented foods as soft starters, sometimes through breast milk from mothers who consumed them. Modern surveys show that infants exposed to a broader range of microbial populations early in life often develop more diverse gut microbiota, correlating with lower risks of certain autoimmune or inflammatory conditions later. The suggestion is that tradition, giving young children foods pre-digested by microbial action, may have offered invisible protection across generations. Families didn't theorize, they observed healthier children. Now science recognizes that those decisions shaped immune landscapes quietly for the long term. Even appetite regulation may reflect this microbial partnership. Some small studies link probiotic-rich diets to shifts in appetite hormones like leptin and ghrelin, which signal hunger and satiety. Historically, societies with staple fermented foods often displayed dietary patterns that promoted balance, even in environments of inconsistent harvest. Fermentation didn't only keep food edible. It may also have nudged populations toward steadier appetites and more predictable metabolic health. Of course, the move into clinical settings adds another layer. In 2025, hospitals began experimenting with probiotic-rich diets for patients recovering from gastrointestinal surgeries. Outcomes included improved digestion post-operation and fewer secondary infections. Though data is preliminary, the clinical interest highlights how health systems are circling back to practices once carried out in kitchens. Efforts are also in line with the WHO traditional medicine strategy, which emphasizes integrating time-tested cultural practices into broader health systems while ensuring safety and research accountability. Fermented foods fall neatly into this evolving conversation, balancing cultural heritage with new mechanistic understanding. The deeper lesson is that fermentation reveals partnership between humans and microbes. Ancient people thought they were preserving food. In reality, they were cultivating microscopic communities that preserved them in return. Each bubbling vat of sauerkraut or kefir jar wasn't just food storage. It was a reservoir of microbial allies. The ancients didn't talk about microbiota symbiosis, but their survival depended on it. Modern science now frames the same practice as coevolution. Our health relies on organisms we nurtured accidentally for centuries. In the market today, the rediscovery comes with price tags. Designer kombucha brands, probiotic shots, brightly packaged krauts, luxury labels for what used to be everyday sustenance. It's a comic reversal worth noting, but the biology is consistent. The jar on a boutique shelf and the jar buried in a farmhouse cellar both yield the same effect: live microbes interacting with the gut to sustain human health. The pattern is easy to see. Stronger microbial diversity, calmer immune responses, subtle mood shifts, richer nutrition. These are the benefits discussed in modern studies. None are guaranteed miracle outcomes, but they fit what cultures built quietly into meals without fanfare. The ancestors weren't optimizing microbiomes on purpose. They were making dinner, and the outcome happened to be layered health benefits we are only now documenting with graphs and reviews. Taken together, fermentation shows that everyday necessity can harbor sophisticated health tools. What looks like heritage cuisine now was originally a practical strategy against hunger, and in the process it supported immunity, nutrition, and possibly mood. That continuity is the enduring irony. Modern science reframes age-old habits as new insights, when in reality they are old traditions spoken in a different vocabulary. It raises a final question: if habits as ordinary as salted cabbage are cultured, milk carried hidden biological value, perhaps other seemingly mundane practices carried similar weight. Some were not stored in jars or bowls, but experienced directly through contact with the living environment itself. Grounding, literally touching grass. Grounding, literally touching earth with bare skin, was once so ordinary that no one needed to be told to do it. Shoes were thin, if they existed at all, and daily life placed feet directly onto mud, grass, sand, or stone. Farmers worked fields with soles pressed into soil. Children ran past made of dust and rock. Sleep often happened on mats close to the earth, or wooden boards pulled from local ground. Across environments, the point of contact between human skin and natural surfaces was continuous. No one described this as healing or therapeutic. It was just how life happened. Modern environments have rewritten that routine. Pavement lines the streets, High-rise living lifts us above terrain, and thick rubber soles make nearly every step insulated. Synthetic flooring, carpets, concrete, artificial turf, all of it creates a constant barrier between our bodies and the ground beneath us. Outside of vacations or brief strolls in parks, most people rarely touch natural earth surfaces directly. What was once unavoidable is now rare, and it has shifted from unnoticed habit to marketed wellness trend. The modern term for this is grounding or earthing, and its framing has drifted between cultural symbolism and scientific speculation. Advocates often suggest that skin contact with the ground may influence biological systems, sometimes by proposing electrical explanations, the transfer of electrons, or balancing of internal charge. These explanations are intriguing but unproven. Some small-scale studies have reported improvements in markers like stress, sleep patterns, or blood pressure in participants exposed to grounding practices. Others describe reductions in subjective anxiety or pain. But here it is important to be precise. The evidence is limited, studies are often small, and mechanisms remain speculative. Many of the claims you hear in popular wellness spaces like electrons neutralizing free radicals or guaranteed stress hormone reduction are at best hypotheses. At present, there is no broad consensus in the scientific literature that grounding is a proven medical intervention. That doesn't mean the practice is meaningless. It simply means the strongest support comes from cultural history and individual reports, not yet from large-scale clinical consensus. Ancient societies lived barefoot or close to the earth nearly all the time, so if chronic exposure to natural environments had a subtle physiological effect, their bodies would have encountered it continuously. In contrast, today's bodies are mostly insulated. Framing grounding as restoring a lost baseline is perhaps the fairest way to describe it, without overstating the case. Anecdotally, many who try grounding report a sense of calm after walking barefoot on grass, soil, or sand for 10 minutes. Whether this is due to electrical interaction, sensory stimulation, or simply spending time in nature, the effect feels real. And even if the underlying mechanism is debated, the practice itself is low risk. Stepping barefoot onto natural ground requires no specialized gear, no subscriptions, no cost besides time and attention. Where clinical trials remain sparse, the personal experiment is accessible to anyone. Consider the cultural continuity. Indigenous groups often practice barefoot ceremonies or rituals framed as communion with the land. Island communities slept on mats pressed directly against wood and earth. Desert travelers carried minimal footwear, if any. Traditions often describe this closeness as connecting with energy, balance, or spirit. Whether metaphorical or literal, what they articulated mirrors what many now describe as a felt sense of restoration. The language differs, spiritual versus scientific, but both point toward environmental contact having a noticeable impact. Urbanization produced the opposite effect. Multi-level buildings, constant shoe wear, and synthetic surroundings have stripped that routine contact from daily life. Unlike ritual fasting or deliberate meditation, grounding did not require conscious practice for most of history. Its decline may explain why today it feels like novelty when in fact it's reintroduction. The wellness industry has seized on this gap, selling grounding mats, conductive shoes, and specialized bedding claiming to replicate direct earth contact indoors. Entire companies now profit from manufacturing what a patch of grass or soil already provides for free. This commercialization is part of the irony. What was once unavoidable has been rebranded as a lifestyle upgrade. People now pay hundreds for mats that simulate a barefoot walk, when stepping outside would achieve much the same experiential effect. Of course, the convenience of modern substitutes appeals to those without easy access to natural surfaces. Hospitals and wellness centers sometimes experiment with conductive equipment, but these setups are exploratory and not backed by conclusive evidence. The research is interesting, but still early. The important distinction is between possibility and proof. Some preliminary studies suggest grounding may influence sleep quality or subjective stress, but evidence is sparse, and systematic reviews conclude that more rigorous trials are needed before strong claims can be made. Popular articles often stretch results into definitive outcomes, which misleads people searching for reliable health strategies. The evidence should be read with caution, potentially beneficial, worth exploring, but not established fact. For those curious, the safest engagement is experiential. Try spending 10 or 15 minutes barefoot in a local park, on grass, sand, or soil. Notice the sensations and see whether you feel calmer or more settled afterward. Label this as anecdotal, not evidence-based, but significant enough to notice personally. That single act reflects both cultural tradition and modern curiosity. Ancient people did it constantly. Modern people can treat it as optional experiment. The health frame benefits from humility. If grounding does influence stress, sleep, or cardiovascular function, it would add to a broad body of research connecting natural environments with human well-being. We already know that time spent outdoors, exposure to daylight, and immersion in green space improve mood, attention, and sleep cycles. Grounding may be a physical extension of that broader story, or it may simply be one more way to nudge people outside, integrating tactile connection where visual and sensory immersion already help. Either way, positioning grounding within that larger pattern seems safer than isolating it as a miracle intervention. The online phrase touch grass is a fitting echo. Often tossed as sarcasm to suggest escaping digital obsession, it accidentally points toward a practice that may have real emotional and physical benefits. Grounding is not about mystical healing fields or guaranteed hormone resets. It may simply be about restoring a human connection to environments we evolve within. Textures, temperatures, sensations that modern insulation filters out. Seeing grounding in this light restores balance to the discussion. Instead of framing it as proven cure or dismissing it as fantasy, we can recognize it as a practice with cultural roots, anecdotal appeal, and emerging but inconclusive scientific exploration. Its value doesn't require exaggerated claims. A barefoot walk already provides a direct encounter with natural surfaces, something our ancestors received every day without noticing. Whether future research confirms measurable physiological benefits or not, the act remains grounding in the most literal sense. The broader thread joining practices like grounding is their simplicity. Cold exposure, meditation, fasting, each require no manufactured tools, no purchased devices. Grounding fits the same category, free ordinary behaviors that once defined human survival. Modern interest reframes them as rediscovered strategies, sometimes inflated by marketing, sometimes tested by science, often both. What matters is that they invite us to notice how small, everyday behaviors can shape physiology and perception. From ancient fields to modern parks, the act of touching the ground persists as a quiet reminder of interdependence with our environment. The fact that research lags behind tradition does not erase its potential. It simply demands careful interpretation. Grounding is low risk, culturally embedded, and personally testable, but not yet proven therapy. Approach it with curiosity, patience, and awareness that anecdote does not equal evidence. That balanced approach honors both heritage and honesty. And this sets the stage for another practice just as humble and just as often overlooked in daily life. If grounding raised the question of what happens when skin connects with soil, then the next consideration asks what happens when attention turns to something even more fundamental than contact with the ground, something constant, automatic, and always with us, the rhythm of our own breath. Breathwork, mastering airflow before Wi-Fi. Breathwork has been called many things across history: discipline, ritual, training, or even spiritual practice, but at its core it was a method of control. Ancient yogis formalized it into pranayama sequences, samurai used it to steel themselves before combat, and hunters slowed their inhalations to steady hands before releasing arrows. Across cultures, controlled breathing was not treated as a casual act. It was framed as survival, focus, and sometimes enlightenment. What was once regarded as control of life force is now framed as a rediscovered wellness trend sold through retreats and apps that remind people to do something their bodies already perform automatically every few seconds. The modern commodification is both amusing and telling. In 2025, people will pay thousands to attend transformational breathing weekends complete with curated music in scented halls. Some programs package exhalation itself as breakthrough technique. Yet every person already breathes over 20,000 times per day without needing instruction. The irony is obvious. What monks taught freely as foundation, modern culture markets as premium knowledge. What was basic discipline has returned as branded holotropic journeys, or conscious breathing therapies with layers of terminology stacked on top of the same inhale and exhale humans have always carried with them. Stripped of ritual and marketing, the core is straightforward. Changes in breathing rhythm alter the autonomic nervous system. This is the dual system that runs in the background, sympathetic for alertness and energy, parasympathetic for calm and recovery. When breathing speeds up with forceful cycles, sympathetic activity rises, preparing for action. When breathing slows with long, steady exhalations, the parasympathetic branch takes over, reducing heart rate and easing stress hormones. The language has evolved. Ancient teachers spoke of energy, balance, or inner fire, but measurements taken today through sensors and cortisol assays show the physiological toggling. Breathing is one of the rare levers that lets conscious control shape automatic systems. One critical mechanism is often overlooked: carbon dioxide. Most people focus only on oxygen intake, assuming more oxygen equals more energy. In reality, the body needs carbon dioxide levels to remain balanced so that oxygen can actually release into tissues. Rapid or panic breathing expels too much CO2, meaning oxygen clings tightly to hemoglobin rather than feeding muscles and organs. Techniques that slow the breath, such as box breathing or alternate nostril breathing, train tolerance for higher CO2 levels, supporting more efficient oxygen delivery. For ancient warriors, this meant steadier nerves before battle. For modern practitioners, it shows up in endurance training or anxiety management. Same chemistry, different framing. A related marker that has drawn increasing scientific attention is heart rate variability, or HRV. This measures subtle changes in the timing of each heartbeat, a signal of the nervous system's adaptability. A steady low HRV reflects rigidity and stress, while higher HRV suggests resilience. When breathing is slow to a rhythm of about 6 breaths per minute, studies consistently show HRV rising. Ancient rituals explained this as cultivating inner balance. Today's scientists describe it as vagal engagement and nervous system flexibility. The stories differ, but the visible outcomes align. Deliberate breath links body.com with cardiac rhythm. Clinical applications bring the past into the present most clearly. In trauma therapy, deliberately slowing the breath helps people avoid spiraling into panic. Psychologists in 2025 frequently include paced breathing in anxiety treatments, using it to calm hyperactive stress circuits such as the amygdala. For patients confronting PTSD or chronic anxiety, having the bodily control over their own escalation provides stability no pill can exactly replicate. Where yogis spoke of mastering prana, clinicians describe regulation of vagus nerve tone and autonomic balance. Both perspectives point to the same experiential truth: you can use breath to stop runaway fear. Beyond trauma, breathwork features in programs addressing sleep disturbance, generalized anxiety, and chronic stress. Practiced regularly, paced breathing is associated with improved sleep quality and steadier emotional states. The evidence base is still developing, and while results vary, the rationale is consistent. Gentle control of oxygen and carbon dioxide rebalances systems tilted by stress. In clinical treatments, breathwork is rarely positioned as cure, but instead as stabilizing tool, one more accessible method in broader mental health care. Its effectiveness owes to a unique property in physiology. Unlike heart rate, which you cannot directly command, or digestion, which runs unconsciously, breathing belongs to both domains. It can operate under automatic control or conscious regulation. That bridge makes breathwork powerful. Anyone can slow or speed breathing intentionally, and by doing so, shift nervous system state. This rare overlap explains why cultures everywhere emphasize breath as first lesson, because it is the only easily accessible lever into autonomic management. The body feels its effects within moments. In 2025, athletes and coaches have also embraced breath control as performance training. Slow, rhythmic patterns aid recovery, prevent premature fatigue, and stabilize oxygen delivery. Martial artists, endurance athletes, and even corporate professionals test variations of pace cycles to support resilience under pressure. Labels shift, mental reset, performance breathing, oxygen efficiency training, but the functions remain remarkably consistent with what warriors or ascetics did centuries ago before combat or challenge. Across cultures, the similarity is striking. Yogic pranayama mapped detailed sequences, samurai drew strength through ibuki breathing, and Native American hunters inhaled slowly to align with environment and sharpen focus. Each tradition attached symbolic or spiritual explanations, but the physical methods converged, deliberate control of rhythm to change internal state. Today, labs and wearables can map exact physiological shifts, but the essential technique is familiar. Medical institutions are extending breathwork into structured care. Some hospital protocols encourage patients awaiting surgery to practice guided breathing, reducing anxiety and stabilizing vital signs before anesthesia. The language is modern, but the principle is ancient, preparing the body with calm entering stress conditions. Where monks once stayed themselves in courtyards, patients now stay themselves under fluorescent lights. The practice translates across contexts seamlessly. This consistency across time highlights the dual narratives, spiritual energy on one side, measurable biology on the other. Breathing cannot be claimed by one tradition or one modern industry. It has always been the most reliable of human tools at moments of uncertainty. The names prana, chi, vagal tone shift with culture, but the function is universal. For those curious about how it feels, the explanation doesn't need to be complicated. Intentional breathing matters because it gives voluntary control over something normally automatic. That sudden ability feels like holding a steering wheel for systems that usually run without input. A person who tries even a few minutes of slow in-breath and long out-breath will notice their physiology toggling, pulse lowering, thought slowing. The subjective calm aligns with measurements in medical labs. The body reflects back control. That discovery alone explains why nearly every tradition placed breathing at the center of discipline. This makes breathwork simple to demonstrate in practice. A production tip: during this section, include a visual prompt for viewers to try a short-paced breathing exercise later, such as a guided inhale for 4 counts, slow exhale for 6. Emphasize that this is not prescribed therapy, but a testable experience. Let audiences feel how intentional breath shifts their state. That participation makes the science less abstract and mirrors what ancients understood through experience. What has changed most is language and branding. Modern retreats stage elaborate environments, trainers trademark counting methods, and apps build subscription models around timers. Yet none of this modifies the underlying mechanisms of airflow, oxygen, and nervous response. The layers added by commerce are external. The body responds identically whether breathing under a sky full of stars or in a studio with background flutes. The practical question remains unchanged. Will you practice? Consistent repetition, not packaging, defines the outcome. Breathwork stands as one of the clearest examples of continuity across human time. Every generation rediscovered and reframed it. Each wrapped the same actions with new symbols, but the inhale remained an inhale and the exhale remained an exhale. What is marketed as discovery today was daily skill centuries ago. When seen across context, the supposed innovation loses novelty but gains deeper meaning, simplicity that lasts. And so breathwork closes a circle of disciplines that highlight a curious truth. Each of these practices, whether trained, ritualized, or rediscovered, shows survival behaviors later reframed as lifestyle choices. The same thread runs through all of them, the pattern ancient hacks rebranded. Look back at each practice: immersion in bitter rivers, chanting circles, grinding roots, going hungry, long temple silences, fermenting vegetables, going barefoot, and shaping breath. Taken together, they remind us that none of these behaviors began with wellness coaches, brands, or apps. They were developed slowly, through trial and necessity, by people who had no other options. Winters taught toughness. Chants created group strength. Plants relieved sickness. Periods of scarcity became rituals. Meditation steadied minds. Fermentation preserved harvests. Ground carried our bodies, and breath carried our nerves. Today, these same actions appear modern only because they have been severed from their roots and wrapped in fresh packaging. The simplest description of this cycle is direct. We rebrand what we've already lost contact with. Ice water, marketed as cutting-edge resilience. Sound baths sold as rare experiences. Herbal powders priced as supplements. Skipping meals framed as productivity hack. Meditation behind subscription walls. Fermentation turned into capsules. Energy mats that simulate dirt. Guided breathing labeled with jargon. What was once default now returns as product. Science has only recently measured many of these effects with tools precise, enough to satisfy skeptics. Cortisol tests confirm stress shifts during fasting or meditation. Brain imaging maps activity changes during chants or breathing cycles. Immune markers fluctuate after microbial foods. These new explanations differ from spiritual, symbolic vocabularies of tradition, but they are directed at the same underlying processes. Ancestors spoke in terms of spirit, balance, or cleansing, while researchers use insulin thickness, vagal tone, or cytokine levels. Both describe lived realities. What separates them is the kind of proof each culture trusted. The irony sits clearly in consumer life. People buy kombucha for $10 when grandparents fermented cabbage cheaply in jars. Breath training gets packaged in apps when soldiers want steady lungs silently before battle. Sound meditation studios sell access to what used to be communal song around fire. In every case, the physiology is identical. What changes is cost, access, and branding. One sharp truth emerges: convenience is expensive. The old practices solve problems without retail, but in leaving them behind, we repurchase and repackaged. Still, we should give science its place. Without modern validation, these practices remain folklore, easily dismissed by institutions. Clinical trials, imaging, and biochemistry pull them into policy and medicine. Saying fasting refines the soul is meaningful to practitioners, but saying fasting improves insulin sensitivity persuades a medical community to adopt it as a protocol. That distinction matters. Ancient trial and error produced ideas that lasted. Modern measurement gives them credibility in new contexts. Without both halves, the record remains incomplete. Group them again and the outline becomes obvious. Survival behaviors slowly ritualized, abandoned with modern convenience, then returned later as marketed lifestyle. Cold was adaptation, now it's biohacking. Chant was community, now it's session-based sound therapy. Plants were medicine cabinets, now they are branded adaptogens. Hunger cycles were ordinary, now they are intermittent fasting. Meditation was structure for focus, now it's mindfulness training. Fermentation was food storage, now it is probiotic marketing. Soil contact was constant, now it's grounded devices. Breathing practice was discipline, now it's retreats. The thread isn't mystery, it is repetition across time. Perhaps what surprises most is not that these practices worked, but that humans abandoned them once modern life made them unnecessary. Screens, processed food, urban housing, insulated environments sever basic exposures. People feel the cost in stress, fatigue, and illness. Then research confirms that reintroducing the simplest practices often restores balance. It was never about novelty. It was about forgetting. The body calibrates to environments, and when those environments change, resilient skills slip away. There is also a cultural pattern worth noting. Primitive life attached mythologies to habits because myths gave meaning. Advanced life stripped them, replaced daily rituals with industrialized ease, then reintroduced them once markets noticed gaps. The result is disconnection followed by rediscovery. Packaging changes, claims shift, interpretations swing from mystical to biochemical, but the body does not move with fashion. It responds the same way it always has. That stability anchors the irony. New names for old systems repeated endlessly. When viewed in this frame, human progress is less about invention and more about translation. One generation finds a reliable practice and explains it as spirit or cosmic balance. Another generation ignores it in favor of convenience. Later, with better instruments, someone maps the same practice into data and publishes results. At that point, what was dismissed as superstition becomes redefined as evidence-based. The cycle continues with other tools, repeated across centuries. Knowledge does not vanish, it waits for rephrasing. The value of recognizing this pattern lies in humility. Modern people often frame ancestors as irrational or unscientific. Yet their careful observations built the starting point for many interventions. They embedded survival data in stories, songs, and rituals, so practices would survive across generations. Calling them first biohackers is an exaggeration. It's an accurate reflection of how they tested, iterated, and retained effective methods of resilience. Their laboratory was lived experience, their metrics were survival and group stability. Today, much of the discussion boils down to balancing hype with evidence. Some practices, like meditation and fasting, have multiple RCTs and systematic reviews supporting measurable effects. Others, like grounding, remain speculative with small trials and ongoing debate. Herbal remedies vary widely depending on preparation and dosing. Fermentation has broad observational support with growing interventional evidence.
The safe posture is
Skepticism mixed with curiosity. It's possible to acknowledge potential with turning it into absolute truth. The takeaway is this: cold, sound, plants, fasting, stillness, microbes, soil, and breath all began as ordinary tools for survival and meaning. They became ritual, then faded, then returned as branded solutions. Science has only recently mapped why they work, but physiology has always carried the same response. We do not witness invention, we witness reframing. The packaging changes more often than the biology. Here is where perspective matters. Recognizing the cycle of loss and rediscovery invites personal choice. You don't need to buy versions layered with marketing. Walking outside barefoot is free. Fermenting food at home costs little. Breathing slowly in silence costs nothing. Fasting requires no product. Cold water is available without subscription. The practices are still accessible outside of commercial framing. What doors you enter, temple floor, wellness app, or natural river, makes less difference than the act itself. The body records the same pattern. So each of these so-called hacks is not novelty but memory resurfacing. Each trend is inheritance wearing contemporary costume. The question worth asking is simple. Do we recognize it as ours, or do we continue to rent it back for a fee? That's the modern dilemma of rediscovery. Paying for what was once free, mistaking rebranding for breakthrough. The body, meanwhile, responds quietly, unbothered by whether its stimuli comes from ritual chant, marketed product, or survival necessity. And that leaves us with a provocation. Which of these practices actually belongs in your daily routine? Is it cold exposure, regular meditation, consistent fasting, or the simple habit of breathing with intention? Comments become part of this larger record, a small echo of oral tradition moving onto digital threads. Share what you notice, test what appeals, question what doesn't, and consider where modern marketing disguises your own inheritance. Because when you step back, the essential reminder is clear. Some practices have strong evidence, others have only hints, but all reveal ancestors using their world to adapt. It's not about mysticism, it's not about blind skepticism. It's about remembering. Curiosity and caution belong together. That produces a more accurate respect for what traditions preserve and for what modern research affirms. So the final recognition of this pattern isn't nostalgia, it's continuity. Humans act, adapt, forget, and rediscover, but biology remains steady. What happens next depends on how we interpret what is already visible. And it raises a larger question we're carrying forward. If today's rediscovered tools once sounded mystical until biology confirmed them, what current habits might tomorrow's science validate? That question points directly into the final reflection. Ancient people were not guessing blindly. They were experimenting, testing, and keeping what worked. Today, we know cold immersion and some fasting protocols have randomized trial evidence showing improved resilience, while other habits like grounding and expanded breathwork show promising but mixed results. Science has only recently begun measuring what tradition carried forward for centuries. The sharper question is simple. Which ancient practice would you actually commit to this month, and why? Comment below. And if you try something new, especially cold exposure or extended fasting, check with a clinician first. Curiosity is valuable, but safety matters too.